A primeira conferência do segundo dia do Congresso, Citizen Empowerment through Promotional Media Literacy, a Provocation for Discussion, está a cargo de Lee Edwards. Professora de Strategic Communication and Public Engagement na London School of Economics, Lee Edwards dedica-se especialmente à relação entre a comunicação estratégica e as desigualdades, justiça social, democracia e literacia mediática. Escreve de forma exaustiva sobre temas como a participação deliberativa na definição de políticas públicas de comunicação social, literacia mediática, relações públicas e democracia. Please welcome Lee Edwards.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the organisers for inviting me to be here. I'm delighted to be able to talk with you today and to share some ideas. I have mentioned in a couple of social media clips that have been done that I really want to treat this kind of talk as a provocation for discussion. It's a little bit sideways to some of the things that you are talking about during the conference. And it's not really a common perspective in media literacy, so I'd ask for your patience and imagination while you're listening. So the idea that I want to work with is this idea of citizen empowerment through a kind of promotional orientation to media literacy. And I want to talk about it because it feels like citizenship is in trouble. It's been in trouble for some time, and we seem a bit stuck in terms of what to do with it. There are significant declines in institutional trust. There's increasing polarization of societal and political debates, and too often hate spills onto streets and into online spaces. And we seem to have forgotten how to bridge the differences between us, believing that only those like us are those that matter. And media literacy, as we know, is often invoked by policymakers to tackle these challenges. It has a long history as education that can help citizens navigate and critically engage with the complex media and information environment, with the hope that if we're more media literate, better skilled, then we'd be better protected from harm and more able to participate in public debates. And in that way, media literacy has the potential to strengthen social cohesion and democracy. But in this talk, I want to argue that these goals are achievable, but only also if we account for the role of promotional industries in media literacy. These industries, public relations, advertising, branding, digital marketing, and their subspecialisms, they leverage digital architectures to target, tailor, and deliver vast volumes of content to audiences. In other words, the digital architectures that we discuss frequently provide the scaffolding for content to circulate, but the promotional industries are a vital source of that content, and so they need to be more explicitly acknowledged. Why should we be concerned about promotional industries and the media in particular? Well, the type of communication that promotional industries produce is based on marketing principles that prioritize the interests of organizations. And I'm talking about this industrial scale promotion. I'm not talking about individual people posting things that they want other people to see. This industrial scale of content increases their power vis-a-vis other kinds of voices and types of content. And promotional industries also support the digital architectures that are known to be socially harmful by both promoting them as a form, in their work and feeding them with content. And critics also argue that the scale and embeddedness of promotional content in our communications infrastructures has consolidated a marketized, audience-driven model of information visibility and circulation that dilutes our capacity for civic engagement and facilitates the circulation of harm. And all these types of influence on the media increase the danger that information integrity and quality becomes secondary to promotional priorities. And there is enough evidence to suggest that such distortions are part of the promotional playbook. They are not exceptions to the rule. In the current context, for example, promotional industries are already well underway in their manipulation of generative AI data sources in the service of brands, so that branded content becomes more available to generative AI tools as they scrape the information landscape in the internet. How that kind of manipulation might be visible to users is completely unexplained, and certainly the record of the promotional industries is that they won't tell users very much about what they're really doing. History of the internet also suggests that if we leave digital infrastructures to promotional interests, they will generate discriminatory and harmful outcomes. But there are also positives for promotional content and promotional industries. Promotion is used as an extremely powerful tool for activism. It provides a route to having voice and collective action for people who are marginalized. And it can also support efforts to foster deliberative debates among citizens. So we need to find a way to make that resource available to people in a more effective way. Now, at the moment, advertising is the only promotional industry that has received any attention in media literacy, but the other industries are some of society's most prolific communicators. And I'm arguing that they incorporate other complex practices that influence the media landscape. So market research, behavioral science are used to understand audience habits and values, attitudes and behaviors to tailor information to their needs. Search engine optimization, generative AI optimization aligns content with the interests of digital architectures and how they prioritize information and to manage visibility. To sustain audience interest, promotional professionals create affective content, align it with trending topics, employ bots and real people to share it and make it more visible. They use multiple platforms and outlets to find and target their audiences. They adopt formats that prompt more sharing, liking, and other forms of engagement. And they cultivate relationships with other content producers, journalists, influencers, virtual and real. I mean, I could go on. But these techniques are a significant factor in the way the media landscape has currently unfolded and in its dysfunctions as well as its functionality. And therefore, media literacy needs to engage more and more critically with promotional industries. So if we take promotion seriously, then how might we start thinking about media literacy differently? And I think a good starting point is the basic 4 pillars that you will all know of access, analyze, evaluate, and create. So access is about material access to a device or a platform, the skills to navigate the platform, and the language and decoding skills to identify and understand messages. Analysis is about understanding message components, the genres, the styles, but also the author motivations and the strategies used to construct meaning and secure attention. Evaluation takes that analysis to the social context, reflecting on media content from a personal or a societal perspective to understand its impact and its power in specific contexts and for different groups. And then creation, of course, the ability to use language of all kinds to construct content aimed at identifiable audiences and secure their attention through that communication. So these 4 pillars obviously change and inflect slightly differently depending on the type of media literacy that is being targeted. So whether it's digital or civic or eco-media literacy, etc. There are many, as we know. But they provide the basic structure of media literacy. They also invoke certain actors when we're thinking about media literacy. And on the right-hand side of the slide that you can see are the actors that I think are currently seen as most important in media literacy work. So we should be looking at media institutions, online media companies, legacy media companies, platforms, media creators, and that would include journalists, influencers, podcasters, TikTokers, programmers, coders now as well, of course, in the digital world, and advertisers. Media technologies and infrastructures, algorithms, Gen AI structures, social media apps, different media devices, and media audiences, including agentic audiences who are very active on media, who might like or write or comment, and citizens who use media in civic engagement, because there are still some, but also lurkers, people who just are present and watch and read. But aside from advertising, the promotional industries are strangely absent in this list. And it is strange because promotion has long been acknowledged as an important factor in media literacy work. So in 1993, Len Masterman talked about the need to include them in media education and to acknowledge the role of promotion for media. And in the same time period, the US National Leadership Conference on Media Literacy noted that the media have commercial implications, and concerns about the unchallenged promotion of consumerism was a big impetus for media literacy at that time. But discussions since then have taken limited account of the role played by the promotional industries in the media landscape. There is a big project called the Europe-wide Branded Content Network Research Project, which has started to establish the scale of branded content online, but much more needs to be done. So on the media literacy side, then, we have the 4 pillars as an essential starting point. But we also need to think about what the specific characteristics of promotion are to understand how they might extend our thinking about media literacy and its capacity to foster rather than obstruct citizenship. And I want to talk about 5 here. First of all, promotional content has an inherent bias towards organizations and their interests and the benefits. Secondly, however, because revealing that bias might create negative audience perceptions and therefore undermine the persuasive power of the promotion, it tends to be masked. So masking is inherent to promotional content, and it's often done by articulating organizational interests as audience interests, so a kind of form of presenting organizations as altruistic, if you like. Third, promotional communication is focused on managing visibility and circulation. And visibility here is a matter of being seen in a particular way, a way that's favorable to organizations. And circulation extends the potential audiences for organizations to increase the value that can be extracted from them. So content then is designed to maximize visibility and circulate extensively, capturing attention using these affective and spectacular images and messaging that we know, including messages that incorporate audience values to make it more attractive to people, or targeting media outlets that audiences are known to use. This kind of work can also operate in reverse and attempt to secure invisibility. For example, by directing audience attention away from inconvenient truths or ensuring that negative information simply remains out of sight or unpublished. And the final element, or the final characteristic, if you like, is that promotion is applied systemically, using multiple tools, multiple formats, multiple messages, simultaneously and over time, to persuade audiences in the interests of organizations. So we probably all are familiar with the idea of media relations work, where organizations try and connect with journalists to get their information in the news. That might be the most obvious tactic to link to media literacy, but that's used alongside many other tactics: social media promotion, community relations, lobbying, events, sponsorships, SEO, and now, of course, GEO. And all are designed to target audiences in different ways. Manipulating media content and infrastructures, but also using communication to lay the groundwork for favorable audience perceptions that will support organizational interests, reputation, and legitimacy. So how do these principles then change our understanding of access, analysis, evaluation, and creation? Now, I can guarantee you that this slide will jump ahead because there is a timer on my slides that I wasn't aware of. But bear with me and I'll just flip it back to the right slide. So if we rethink access then, access requires the physical ability to access media, to navigate different types of media, and to identify and understand messages. But doing all of these things also pulls a user into the promotional infrastructure of the digital economy. They are likely to be more visible, more trackable, and therefore also more targetable online. That makes them more vulnerable and directs their attention towards like-minded groups rather than engaging with difference, treating them as consumers rather than citizens. So to mitigate these tendencies, a promotional perspective of access should therefore include not only the ability to connect with and use media, but also to disconnect from media infrastructure when needed, to protect one's data as far as possible, to set privacy settings as one would wish them, and to delete a contact when desired. In other words, it should include a relatively sophisticated knowledge of how to engage with, but also get around media infrastructures through which promotional actors can exploit our presence. It's worth noting that similar ideas have already been proposed in the media literacy literature in the form of critical ignoring practices by Kozireva in 2022, where users adopt practices that allow them to distance themselves from harmful information, and in media quiteracy by Good and Ciccone this year, where being literate in the exploitative infrastructures of media can lead to temporary or permanent exit from some types of use altogether. From a promotional perspective, however, quitting might be made up of a number of different practices designed to resist promotional work, not all of which result in outright withdrawal, but which still invoke the critical engagement with content that access demands. So this might include, for example, ignoring content or deleting it or repurposing it to resist consumption. So, for example, the way that people repurpose company logos as a form of activism. So you see BP's logo with an oil drop coming off it, for example. Or they might accept the content but simply do additional research to confirm its veracity. And these actions are close to what Polizzi has called strategic disengagement, a range of informed and empowered practices on the part of users to manage the promotional media environment. Analysis is focused on the ability to recognize different genres and styles of media and analyze the author's motivations behind the content. You will find that for promotional purposes, promotional genres and styles tend to be easily recognized. So, for example, using emotive contents to secure charity donations, or using a particular color or typeface to enable brand recognition. But information about authorship and motivations is much more difficult to pin down. First of all, promotional authorship involves multiple authors, clients, agencies, outsourced specialist services, and now, of course, generative AI technologies. Authorship in itself is therefore very difficult to identify. At the same time, deciphering motivations is often a matter of guesswork, and that can be worsened by the promotional norm of masking bias and deflecting attention, so that organizational interests are simply not always obvious from published content. So a promotional perspective of analysis would need to include an understanding of why promotion is important for organizations, including the value of communication. Why do organizations communicate? The roles that practitioners and clients take on, production decisions and processes, the rationale for and use of different media technologies. In specific cases, they would need to understand the organizational background, what their objectives are, why they're communicating on this topic, and how those objectives might be served by that communication. And they would need an understanding of promotional strategies, including the steps used to create the campaigns and the objective of influencing audience behavior, as well as how that behavior is defined in organizational terms. This kind of knowledge would help explain the promotional value of different representational genres and styles, but would also enable users to complicate questions of authorship, for example, understanding its collective nature, and to consider both overt and covert motivational possibilities for the content that they see. Evaluation extends these analytical insights to the wider social context, and it's arguably where critical skills are most important in media literacy. And to do this in relation to promotion, we have to understand the way promotional infrastructures, their industries, their technologies, their practices, influence the distribution of political and economic power in the wider social environment alongside the media and as part of that system. But understanding the political economy of promotional industries is challenging. They generate billions of dollars every year, but their industry structures are very complex. The connections between companies and clients are often hidden, and the separate industries themselves evolve quickly as they rapidly adapt to new technologies and competitors. All these things also then change depending on contextual factors such as the law in a particular country, the specific media environment, or political governance structures. As a result, it's very difficult to trace who is paying for what promotional content, or to identify the relationships between different promotional companies, their clients, and the media industries. Moreover, when whole industry sectors coordinate obfuscatory promotional work, such as publicizing misleading information and research, manipulating the agenda for public debate, and using front groups to shift public opinion in their favor, as they have done with tobacco and sugar and climate change, they then construct a facade of alternative facts that foster uncertainty about critical issues. And when these are reinforced across multiple media outlets, which is part of the promotional strategy, and across different authors, then that makes the critical evaluation of content much more difficult because competing perspectives look both eccentric and marginal. It further distorts the basis for media literacy strategies like fact-checking and source evaluation because they fabricate an apparent consensus that may be based on distortions of the truth in reality. So for effective evaluation that integrates a promotional perspective, users need to consider alternative narratives or information that might deliver a different kind of outcome for the organization, something perhaps a bit more negative. They would have to ask the what if question. What if then the world isn't the way that this organization is saying it is? That then would reveal the self-interest inherent in the existing content being promoted. Understanding the political economic structures of the promotional industries, for example, through public documentation of it that is much more available in layperson's language rather than in technical financial language, that could help users start to connect the information they see with the wider socio-political and geopolitical power of promotion, and with the self-interest, the financial self-interest, the reputational self-interest of the promotional industries themselves in the content being published. They would also need to know when and how organizations make decisions about influencing or creating media content in light of broader societal trends or issues, because promotional campaigns are often timed to maximize visibility or circulation, building on certain social events, either simply, releasing something at Christmas because it's going to sell better at Christmas, but also releasing negative information on a day when there's lots of other stuff going on, so that information isn't seen. So there's lots of work around timing and scheduling that relates to the social kind of context that promoters do. And so knowing and understanding that is also important for media literate, if you like, evaluation of promotional work. And finally, creation, the fourth pillar. The explosion of UGC, user-generated content, suggests that many users are already adept at using media, but they may not be fully equipped with the promotional knowledge that underpins professionally produced content. Creation, of course, also intersects with access, in that users may not have the access or the skills to use the tools that promotional industries deploy. So some of these can be quite technical: media monitoring software, brand analysis tools, influencer databases. They're technical, they're also expensive. So users aren't going to have access to those kinds of things or know how to use them necessarily. For a full palette of creative skills then that incorporates promotion, users would need an understanding of the benefits and disadvantages of different media channels and technologies. They would need to know how to tailor content to audience interests based on some kind of research around audiences. They would need to understand what it means to adopt a systemic approach to communication across multiple formats. And they'd need to be able to use a breadth of communication skills, including multimedia, algorithmic, and generative AI tools. They should be able to critically reflect also on the wider implications of their communication, recognizing when creating content may be detrimental, perhaps because it won't support their objectives, perhaps because it will prompt potentially harmful reactions online. They would need a foundational understanding of the opportunities and risks of communicating via different types of media, including reflections on who they want to reach, and the possible impact of their content on those people, the messages they want to circulate, the strategies best suited for this, and the possibility of content being taken up in unanticipated ways. Crucial in all these considerations is understanding the strategic dimensions of content creation and media participation, and the principle of making informed choices about what to post. So to go back to the kind of primary focus of the talk then, how does this idea of promotional media literacy foster citizen empowerment? Well, how could it? Because it doesn't exist yet. Certainly, we can't dictate or guarantee that recognizing promotional content and techniques will magically transform individuals into civic-minded citizens. But perhaps this shouldn't be our immediate demand. The first step of revealing the possibilities of empowerment is to recognize how power and subjugation operates in our own environment in relation to us. It's, if you like, this idea of critical consciousness that Paul has talked about that comes originally from Paulo Freire. The broad generic challenge of platforms and algorithms is often articulated at a societal level, with users feeling relatively helpless in the face of these huge dominant infrastructures, other than when they learn a protectionist form of media literacy. So there is an agency gap, if you like, also that Paul has already written about, a lack of kind of knowing what to do in the face of all of this horror almost. But in promotional media literacy, I think we have a different starting point from protectionism and perhaps a more practical starting point for empowerment. Promotional industries use tools and techniques that once they are known can be recognized, understood, and questioned. They can be sought out, detected, and perhaps even redirected, as when brand jackers manipulate brands, for example. These techniques also, once understood, can be adopted by citizens. We know that activists use them very successfully, but not all citizens are activists. And being able to enact voice on one's own behalf in relation to issues one cares about is also vital to our citizenship. Promotional knowledge, the ability to strategize about how, why, when, and to whom one communicates in order to influence the context that one cares about, is part of this process. And the Fixers logo that you see on the bottom left of the slide is a charity that unfortunately has now stopped, but was in the UK, that was specifically devoted to helping young people take an issue, create a promotional campaign, and generate media work around that. And it was incredibly successful for many people. While media users are able to access tools for media creation, the more strategic understanding of communication is kept on a leash by the industries that profit from it. Promotional media literacy, I think, rebalances this power by making promotional knowledge and the interests that underpin the promotional industries more visible and more available to everyday users. It could increase citizens' capacity to fully benefit from the power of media in the way they would like, and it could counter, in certain spaces and on certain issues, the dominant power of promotional industries in the media environment. The ability to connect with people, to target messaging, and to find support for a cause would enhance citizens' own promotional activity, for example, on platforms such as Instagram or TikTok, and enable them to recognize the power of audiences as a source of collective agency, who can collectively refuse or ignore or repurpose content to resist or reject promotion, but crucially can also understand how promotion can call on others to engage in debate, to take action, to turn their attention to collective social issues rather than only individual self-interest, pushing back then against this individualization of the current media environment and demanding more in the end from those in power. A final note, what are the preconditions for this to work? First of all, promotional media literacy needs to be better understood. We need more research on the intersections of promotional and media industries, on the balance of promotional and non-promotional content in the media, as well as the types of actors that produce and circulate it, and how users are targeted and respond. We need to know more about how promotional content may already be integrated into the media literacy curriculum and what could be added. We need to understand how users resist promotional content already, and even how much they already know about how these industries work. Perhaps most importantly, we need all these skills to be made widely available. Media literacy needs to be compulsory, embedded in school and university curricula, and disseminated to adults in a systematic and consistent manner. We need to find better ways to hold the promotional industries to account for their role in the media landscape. Shifting the balance of power towards users is one important step. But regulators also need to start holding these industries to account, making them responsible for the effects of their communication on the social and political fabric of society. Promotion is not only ever one thing, it is complex, and many promotional actors are socially oriented, but there are many who are not. And it is time, I think, to move the lens of media literacy towards challenging their dominance. And citizen empowerment through promotional media literacy is a valuable starting point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lee. Bom dia a todos, a todas. Aqui espaço para duas perguntas para a nossa convidada. Quem estiver disponível, interessado em fazer aqui uma questão, ali. Está frio ainda, não é?
I've silenced you all.
So freezing. Frozen questions. Yeah, let's go. Courageous. Thank you.
Obrigada. Thank you very much. How do you perceive in all your studies there? I understand this economics school. What is the role of the activist design in the communication of human rights? Thank you.
So the question is more, what's the role of activists in the communication of human rights? Oh.
Yeah.
You were a bit hesitant. Did you want to say that again?
Yeah, I was thinking like how the activism that may be from individuals, organizations, and even when it's together with the state, like we used to see in Portugal, what is the role of this design in to better promote what may be the difference from a pure commercial design, maybe? Thank
Right.
you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Just what could be the strong points of it that it could even win the race against a commercial design that may undermine human rights? Thank you.
Yeah. So one of the challenges of this idea of promotional media literacy is that, and I haven't yet published on it, it's about to be published, but one of the arguments is that, yeah, but you're making all people promoters and they'll just go and do the same thing that all the corporations do. And I think your question kind of speaks to that in the sense that the answer really is about using the tools that corporates use, using the tools that are available through promotion for the benefit of a non-corporate interest. The sophistication of the tools is then, needs to be on the same level if it wants to be, if you're trying to communicate content that needs to be visible, that will circulate well. And I think in relation to human rights, there are, vast numbers of examples of where it is done incredibly well. Amnesty International, I mean, you could list all of the global charities that kind of work on that. I think perhaps one of the more immediate challenges, if you think about it, I started thinking about this very much from the individual user perspective, because we know that organizations have capacity and they have resource. And it's really about where the user tries to find space to talk about what they care about in an environment where they're constantly being pushed to talk about other stuff or to think about other stuff or just to think about stuff, just to get stuff. And I think those techniques don't necessarily need to be, and they can speak to human rights because they can speak to, the freedom to be visible, the freedom to engage with others, the freedom to move in particular places. But they don't have to be massively sophisticated, because the audiences that people target in their immediate need for rights are very often the audiences with the people with whom they live. So the Fixers charity that I was talking about, or that I mentioned, for example, there was a young man who did a video campaign in Liverpool, a city in the north of England. He had Tourette's syndrome. And he was massively stigmatized, and he did a video that was circulated by the council through the kind of municipality that helped to explain that Tourette's was not him, and that he, that he had the right to be in spaces and people should not judge him for how he appeared. That was an incredibly powerful video, but he really just needed somebody who could film him. He needed some ideas about where to go and who to talk to make it an interesting video and not just all about me. And he needed to think about the messaging a bit. So, and where does it matter most, where I kind of make this argument visible? And those are kind of more fundamental promotional strategies. They don't require a huge amount of resource. So if you're thinking about the pushback against the shrinking of rights at the local level, I think you can keep promotional ideas relatively simple. I think if you're talking about it at the global level, there is already stuff that's being done that is, equally sophisticated. And then we're in the world of, okay, what's circulating where, the echo chambers that digital infrastructures create, that kind of thing, then it's difficult.
Thank you so much, Lee. I think if we don't have more questions, is there any question there? Just one small question, then we'll go to our coffee break.
Thank you so much for the presentation. My question is about power and control, because if promotional media becomes more sophisticated, then citizens can realistically decode. So is media literacy just a comforting illusion of empowerment? Thank you so much.
Ooh, don't know if that's a good question to ask at this conference. It's media literacy an illusion. I'm an academic. Knowledge is power. I think that's my basic answer. I think the more we know about these things, the better. It's very easy when you work in this space to assume that some of the really basic stuff that we know is known. People know how the media operate and they kind of get it and they don't really care. And I don't think that's necessarily true. My kids, who are not daft, don't understand fully how algorithms work. They have a kind of vague idea, but they don't really understand fully. They have no idea how promotional industries have now worked out, for example, or will be implementing this, that if they want their information to appear, or their clients' information to appear in a generative AI search feed, they have worked out that you've got to be in first answer, because people stick with the first answer. You need to construct your content in a way that Gen AI tools like it. So you need to do lists, and you need to be in user-generated forums. They go to Reddit, they go to UGC kind of spaces. So you've got to get your brand in there, and then it will be picked up. You need to also frame your content in terms that people writing a prompt might use, i.e. people like me or people like, Mrs. Blogs down the road, where they'll just say, where shall I buy the best washing machine powder? And so they kind of create their content in a forum that says the best washing machine powder for this stuff is, and it gets picked up. All of that is already happening. We don't know that. We don't understand that. And we have to start by telling people that this is what's happening in the media landscape that they have. So yes, the infrastructures are terrible, but I'm not going to stop somebody from going on TikTok because I say that TikTok's algorithms are negative. But if you start engaging with them with the individual bits of content that they're seeing, to take their attention away from the big structure that they know is bad, but they're going to use it anyway because they like it, to look at the content that they can question. I was just in a parallel workshop this morning run by Victor and Juliana about teaching media literacy in schools. And there are lots of tools that they can use to start thinking about, not just about source credibility, but also about, what's the promotional intent behind this? And once you know, then you can choose. And again, it's not a question of simply arguing that we must then change everybody into liberated, citizen-minded individuals. We have to give people the power to choose, and they can only choose what they do and how they engage with media if they know what it is. And I think that's really where I'm coming from. So media literacy is an endless task. It's never going to end, but it is important because it's about facilitating choice.